365 Sports, the 4 o'clock hour. Grayson Grundhoefer, Sic'Em365.com, recruiting analyst, also with 365 Sports. And Grayson, thank you very much for your time. So how good a feeling was it that they jumped in on Kaden Knighton as quickly as they did, and yet Khenon Hall continues to kind of know what he's doing, and also the players love him?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a great sign for Baylor as far as their recruiting class in 2025 and kind of just the direction that they're heading and just the momentum that they have right now is really, really cool to see, and something that I think, fans have been talking about. I even think the staff, really wanted to make that change and make sure that the recruiting side of things, had momentum, even after a season that wasn't up to standard. And so I think that this was another sign of just kind of the direction that they're heading on that end. I mean, Knighton is a, 4-star, kind of right around that 4-star territory at the running back position. He fits in need because he's very different than the running backs they have on the current roster. He runs like a 10-600, so blazing speed, definitely a home run hitter at running back. And that's not really something they have on the roster. They have a lot of guys that can make you miss, a lot of guys that catch the football well, a lot of guys that, are good on the goal line. But this kind of speed is a little bit different for the room that they currently have. So he fits really well. I still think they're going to take one more running back in this class, and they have a lot of other, good options available. Again, Khenon Hall doing a great job. The running back position looks like it's going to continue to get healthier and healthier and stronger. And adding Kaden Knighton to the fold definitely helps that.
Grayson, have you noticed an uptick since Jake Spavital joined the staff and what they're doing overall?
Yeah, I think that the Jake Spavital addition is probably more so the fact that when you bring in a recruit and you show a recruit the offense and you show a recruit kind of, what the trajectory is and really the expectation of the offense, I think there's a very clear vision and there's a lot of excitement in that as well. And also, I know a lot of people have talked about this, but a lot of these kids in Texas high school football right now, a lot of them run a spread type offense. And so I think that when you go from your high school and then you come and look at kind of the film that Baylor has and what they're, gonna run under Jake Spavital, I think that it translates really well and gives, a lot of these players kind of a clearer image of, what they're going to be expected to do. And I think it matches more what they've been doing currently in high school. So I think that's a good thing. There's other positions that, kind of look at it differently, right? The quarterback position, obviously, they get to look at Jake Spavital's history of producing really good quarterbacks, including NFL quarterbacks, and that translates really, really well. Other positions, it's more about the scheme in general and how, Spavital has made those various positions, whether it's wide receiver or kind of a hybrid tight end or the running back position, so effective. I think that is, speaking to recruits really well. I think there's some excitement there with that change in offense.
You may have talked about it last week. I wasn't involved, but we did get confirmation from Mack Rhodes this week that Gary Patterson was joining the staff. He dove a little bit further onto the decision-making process. Just what was your initial reaction to that, and what's been maybe some of the reaction that you've heard from around in regards to Gary Patterson having a role in next year's team?
I think it's a kind of an uneasy feeling, right? And it's not so much whether Gary can coach or not. I think anyone who watches football knows Gary Patterson knows football, can coach defense, is a very brilliant football mind. I think we can all agree on that. But the flip side of it is that so many Baylor fans and people who have covered Baylor, remember those kind of tumultuous times, between Gary Patterson, Art Briles, and what that rivalry truly meant, during that time period there. And it was something really special and also something that led to a lot of, people not really loving Gary Patterson. On the flip side, Gary Patterson blocking pretty much anyone who covered Baylor as well. So there was a lot of, I don't know if I want to say animosity, but definitely some uneasy feelings there. And so I think you bring that all together, and now he's on the Baylor coaching staff, and you're going to have some people who are like, well, this is really weird. And I think most people would agree it's a little weird. But then on the flip side, if you look at it from a purely football perspective, you understand the move and kind of what he can bring to the table, what he can bring to the fold from a scouting perspective, as well as just a game planning perspective. I think he's going to do some really nice things for the Baylor program. And It is weird, but I think in general it's going to be a winning situation for Dave Aranda and the entire staff in the football program.
So we mentioned Knighton, that's 2025, which is almost like 10 years from now with the way things are when it comes to commitments, et cetera. But you hope you lock him in and keep him. Hall had Demetrius Brisbane and also Ricky Stewart locked in at SMU. He moves to Baylor. Brisbane's now a commit to Baylor. Stewart is still out there. I know Texas has been heavily involved, and who wouldn't be? What are the thoughts about Ricky Stewart and also Baylor?
Yeah, so I think I kind of want to hit this kind of topic in general. I mentioned this a little bit earlier that I do think Baylor's going to take another running back in this 2025 class. Ricky Stewart is definitely one of the guys that the staff is looking at, one of the guys that the staff would love to have joining the fold as well. Obviously, teammates, like you said, with Demetrius Brisbane, also a really good relationship with Khenon Hall. I think right now, I think a lot of the signs are kind of pointing towards him potentially being at Texas. You've seen crystal balls, various things like that. But the good news for Baylor is they were able to get him in on a junior day visit the same weekend as Brisbane. They were able to bring in multiple other running backs as well that weekend and the weekend following, such as Tiger Ridden, the running back at DeSoto, Michael Turner, the running back at Richland. You kind of look at those three, and those three seem like three guys that Baylor is really, really working hard on landing at least one of the guys from that group. All three of them are four-star prospects. All three of them fit a specific need for this Baylor team as well. Ricky Stewart specifically, though, I do think currently Baylor's in a good position. I think it's them in Texas right now. I'd give the slight edge to Texas. But the good news for Baylor is they have some other options available as well who are very, very good. So a lot of really, really interested prospects at the running back position, in large part due to the hiring of Khenon Hall and the relationships he's been able to build.
So I think spring drill starts about a month from now, the spring practices. And there's all sorts of different things to look at because of the coaching staff changes or whatever. Is there anything in particular, even though it's a month out, that you would be more focused on than anything else?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing going into spring drills is kind of the moving part. And the reason why I say that is because there's just so many guys on this roster, specifically on the defensive side, who are kind of like, okay, are they going to play the same position they played last year? Are they going to move? What's that going to look like? Because, specifically you look at the cornerback room and you see like 6 guys who you feel like are very, very good football players who Baylor can rely on. The question is, do you need 6 cornerbacks? Could you move one of those guys to safety? Could you move a guy to star and be a backup there? Is that move going to take place? I think that's an interesting component. How do things shake up on the defensive line? That's an area that Baylor was still potentially looking at the transfer portal to try to solidify that even more. They weren't able to do that, or at least didn't do that on the defensive line. They did that at the jack position with Steve Linton, but not specifically true defensive ends or defensive tackles. So the question is, do some of these, sophomores, redshirt sophomores, take that step? Or does Baylor look to the spring to try to add another defensive lineman, since they only have one senior defensive lineman, and that's Trevin Maye. So they're still pretty young at that position as well. But you can kind of do that kind of full circle around the entire roster. But I think those two specific areas, the front 3 and then the back, 4, I think I'm going to be most curious about, just seeing how guys move around, if guys move to different positions, various things like that. I think that's going to be very intriguing.
Grayson, we talked about this on the podcast, but we got a different audience here, and we're going to talk some win totals here in a little while. 5.5 for Baylor based on the books that we've seen so far. How you feeling over under 5.5 wins for Dave Aranda and the Bears in 2024?
I still feel like that 5.5 number is a pretty good number for Baylor, and a number that I think they can get to. And I know that a lot of people will say, oh, that's crazy. They were, so bad last year. But even last year when they were terrible, there were still opportunities for them to win some games last year. They just weren't a very good football team. But I do think going into this season, there's reason for optimism. I think they attacked the transfer portal pretty well. I think they have some young guys who should step up and be much better football players, much more consistent football players than they were a year ago. And I think the schedule actually sets up pretty well for Baylor. You don't have a trip where you have 3 straight road games. You have some breaks in there with the double bye week that gives you some opportunities to rest up before you go into some tough environments. And so I think for that reason, I do think Baylor makes a bowl next year. That's kind of where I'm at currently. I think the spring could change my mind one way or another, whether I think, hey, this ceiling for this team, maybe they can actually get to 8 wins, or, oh no, more of the same. Maybe this is more of a 4-win team. I think we'll know more about that during the spring. But I think right now, 5.5 is a good number for a Baylor team that I do think is going to be a true wild card in the Big 12 next year, just like Colorado. I think those two who are both at 5.5 wins projected, I think those two are probably the biggest wild cards in the Big 12 as far as just what they could be as far as ceiling-wise, but then also how the floor could come out from under both of them.
We will discuss this a little bit later in the show in about an hour or so as far as the Big 12 over-under on the wins. We did 7 yesterday. We'll do – 8 yesterday?
Yes.
And we'll do 8 more that were the lower end of the over-under win totals and projections today. Grayson, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Grayson Grundhoefer, Sic'Em365.com. Go to the premium section to read